In the small ranching town of Sage River, a miracle unfolded that no one could have predicted. A sickly Mustang Foal from death, and rejected by everyone at the county auction, found herself in the weathered hands of Thomas Morgan, a broken man, with nothing left to lose. What began as an act of desperate compassion would transform not just the dying foe and the struggling rancher but an entire community. Against impossible odds and expert advice to euthanize the animal, Tom's stubborn determination unearthed not only Solace's remarkable recovery, but the discovery of her connection to a legendary Mustang bloodline thought extinct for decades. Asward spread of the foe's extraordinary abilities with cattle, and her rare genetics powerful forces, moved against the humble rancher, threatening to take everything. But what no one expected was how this fragile creature would bring together a fractured family, inspire a community to stand against corruption, and ultimately reveal talents that would save countless other horses from slaughter. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The annual Sage River Livestock Auction had never been a place for the faint of heart. The cavernous metal building with its sawdust-covered concrete floor and harsh overhead lighting created an atmosphere of stark practicality, where sentiment had no place. Thomas Morgan stood at the back of the crowd, his weathered cowboy hat pulled low over his eyes, masking the weariness that had settled into every line of his face at 58. Tom's tall frame still carried the strength of a lifetime spent working the land, but 3 years of solitude since Clara's passing had bent the shoulders with an invisible weight. His once black hair had given way to salt and pepper, matching the stubble on his sun-weathered face. He hadn't planned to bid. Today couldn't afford to, with the bank breathing down his neck about the mortgage on Sunrise Ranch final lot. The auctioneer called, his voice tinged with impatience as the day dragged to its close. Mustang Foal, female, approximately 4 months, no papers, no health check, obvious respiratory issues. Starting at $50, the metal gate swung open and 2 auction workers half-dragged, half-carried a small Palomino foal into the pen. Tom's breath caught in his throat. The animal could barely stand, her golden coat, dull and patchy ribs protruding sharply through her hide. Her nostrils flared with each labored breath, a thick discharge evident even from where he stood. But what caught Tom's attention were her eyes, deep liquid brown, watching the jeering crowd with a quiet awareness that seemed out of place in such a suffering creature. Wouldn't pay a dime for that walking glue factory, someone called out, triggering scattered laughter. The auctioneer sighed, checking his watch. Folks, we need to clear the building. $40. Anyone at 40? The FES legs buckled, sending her crashing to her knees as she struggled to rise. Her eyes swept the crowd and for a brief moment locked with Tom's. Something stirred in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced since holding Clara's hand as she slipped away. "I'll take her." The words left his mouth before he could stop them. $200. A shocked silence fell over the auction house from the front row. Frank Peterson, owner of the largest horse breeding operation in 3 counties, turned to stare at Tom with undisguised disbelief. His precisely pressed Western shirt and gold watch seemed to gleam under the fluorescent lights, a stark contrast to Tom's faded flannel and worn jeans. "Morgan, have you lost your mind?" Peterson called, his voice carrying across the now quiet room. "That thing won't last the night." The auctioneer, sensing an unexpected windfall, quickly intervened. "I have 200 from Mr. Morgan. Do I hear 50? You won't get another bid because nobody else is crazy enough," Peterson said, turning back to the front with a dismissive wave. "Let him waste his money. Sold to Thomas Morgan for $200, the auctioneer declared, banging his gavel with finality. Liability waiver required a pickup as the crowd dispersed. Tom made his way to the payment counter, aware of the whispers and stares. Following him, his hand trembled slightly as he counted out the bills, money that should have gone toward his overdue feed. Bill he barely registered, signing the paperwork, his mind already racing through what supplies he would need to care for a critically ill Dr. Sarah Wilkins intercepted him before he reached the holding area. Her practical ponytail and lack of makeup conveyed her no-nonsense approach to veterinary medicine. Though the concern in her eyes was genuine, Tom, I couldn't help but notice. "What just happened?" she said, her voice low and urgent. "That foe has advanced pneumonia. At the very least, she needs immediate medical intervention that's going to cost far more than what you paid for her." Tom met her gaze steadily. "Can you help her, Sarah?" sighed, running a hand through her hair. I counter-try, but I can't promise anything, and Tom, she hesitated, placing a hand gently on his arm. You need to be prepared to make a hard decision if she's suffering too much sometimes. The kindest thing is to let go. I know about letting go. Tom replied, his voice rough with emotions he refused to examine, but not today. Not her. The auction workers had already moved on to dismantling the temporary pens when Tom entered the holding area. The F lay on her side in the corner, each breath a visible struggle as he approached. She lifted her head, slightly, those knowing eyes finding his again. Easy there, little one, he murmured, kneeling beside her despite the protests of his arthritic knees. You and me were going home. Getting the foe into his ancient pickup truck proved challenging. She couldn't stand long enough to walk up the ramp he'd borrowed, so Tom ended up carrying her Kraulinger small form against his chest as he struggled up the incline despite her emaciated state. The dead weight of a horse, even a young one, tested the strength in his aging back by the time he settled her on the blankets he'd spread across the truck bed. Sweat-soaked, his shirt despite the cool autumn air, Sarah followed in her veterinary truck carrying supplies she'd hastily gathered. I'll follow you too. Sunrise, Shakal called. We'll need to start treatment immediately. The 15-minute drive to his ranch felt interminable. Tom checked the rearview mirror, constantly catching glimpses of the FO lying motionless under the blanket he couldn't explain even to himself what had possessed him to spend money he didn't have on a dying animal. Clara would have understood. Sheedelways had a soft spot for lost causes. The thought brought a sad smile to his weathered face. Sunrise Ranch had seen better days. The white paint on the two-story farmhouse had weathered to a dull gray that matched the clouded sky above. The barn, though structurally sound, needed repairs to its roof, and several fence posts along the driveway leaned at precarious angles. It was a shadow of the prosperous operation it had been during Tom's grandfather's time, when Morgan cattle had been among the most sought after in the state. Tom backed the truck as close as possible to the barn side entrance. The FO hadn't moved during the journey, and for a terrible moment he feared she might have already slipped away. But as he lowered the tailgate, a soft wheeze confirmed she was still breathing. Let's get her inside, Sarah directed, already unloading equipment from her vehicle. I've got fluids, antibiotics, and a nebulizer. We need to create a clean, warm space together. They prepared a stall with fresh straw and a heat lamp. Tom again carried the foe, this time laying her gently on the soft bedding up close in the bright barn lights. Her condition appeared even worse than at the auction. Her golden coat was marred by patches of missing hair, revealing skin irritated by neglect. The discharge from her nostrils had crusted around delicate tissues, and her breathing produced a rattling sound that made Tom wince. Sarah worked efficiently, listening to the F's lungs and heart, taking her temperature and examining her overall condition. The frown deepening on her face told Tom everything before she spoke. It's bad, Tom. Severe pneumonia, parasites, malnutrition. She's probably been fighting this infection for weeks with no treatment. Sarah straightened, meeting his eyes directly. Her fever is dangerously high. I'm going to be honest with you. Most vets would recommend euthanasia in this situation. Tom's jaw tightened. But you're not most vets. A ghost of a smile touched Sarah's lips. No, I'm not. But I also can't promise miracles. We can try aggressive treatment, but you're looking at round-the-clock care for at least a week, possibly longer medications. Special feed, constant monitoring. It'll be expensive, and there's still a good chance we'll lose her. Tom gazed down at the FO. Despite her weakness, she watched them with those intelligent eyes, tracking their movements. There was something there. A quiet determination that resonated with something deep inside him. She deserves a chance. He said simply, "What do we do?" First, for the next 3 hours. They worked together, establishing IV fluids, administering the first doses of antibiotics, and using nebulizer to help ease the F's labored breathing. Tom absorbed Sarah's instructions with careful attention, knowing he would be handling most of the care himself. Once she left, she'll need medication every 4 hours, Sarah explained, packing up her supplies as evening settled over the ranch. The nebulizer treatments twice a day, and she needs to stay hydrated. If she won't drink on her own, you'll need to use this. She had handed him a large syringe with a soft rubber tip. Small amounts frequently. Don't force it, or she could aspirate. Tom nodded mentally. calculating how he would manage these treatments around his regular ranch chores, with only occasional help from Greg Martinez, the seasonal hand who worked when Tom could afford to pay him. The burden would fall entirely on his shoulders. What are you going to call her? Sarah asked, pausing at the stall. Dortomi hadn't considered a name. He looked at the foe, at her struggle for each breath, at the quiet dignity in her suffering solace. He said after a moment, the word felt right. A reminder of what he hoped to offer her, and perhaps what he himself sought. Sarah smiled. It suits her. She glanced around the barn, her expression turning serious again. Tom, I know things have been tight since Clara passed this treatment plan. It's not going to be cheap. I'll manage, he replied, the stubborn set of his jaw discouraging further discussion on the topic. I'll be back first thing tomorrow, she said, relenting. Call me if anything changes. Overnight. And Tom, she hesitated, try to get some rest. She's not the only one who needs to stay strong after Sarah left. Tom settled on a bale of hay near Solace's stall, his old border collie Star curling up at his feet, the barn's familiar smells, hay, leather. The earthy scent of animals had always brought him comfort tonight. They mingled with antiseptic and medication, creating a strange new reality. What do you think, girl? He asked Star, who cocked her head at his voice. Did I make a crazy decision today? The dog offered no judgment, only the steady companionship that had helped him survive the loneliest days after Clara's death. Tom checked his watch. 2 hours until Solace's next medication. He should use the time to eat something, maybe grab a quick shower. Instead, he remained seated, watching the slight rise and fall of the foe's side, counting each breath as if it might be her last. You keep fighting, he whispered to her. I'll do the same. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the loose board on the barn roof that he'd been meaning to fix for months. Tom pulled his jacket tighter around his shoulders, settling in for what promised to be a long night. Whatever tomorrow brought for tonight, both he and Solace had found a moment's reprieve in each other's company. A small solace against the harshness of a world that had shown them both its unforgiving side. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The first night stretched into an endless cycle of medications, nebulizer treatments, and anxious monitoring. Tom dozed between alarms set on his old flip phone, never sleeping more than 20 minutes at a stretch. By dawn, exhaustion had settled deep in his bones. But Solace had survived the night, a small victory that felt monumental. Morning light filtered through the barn's dusty windows, illuminating the FES still form. Her breathing remained labored, but to Tom's untrained ear, the rattling sound seemed marginally less severe. He gently stroked her neck, careful to avoid the IV line Sarah had placed hanging in there. Aren't you? He murmured, stubborn little thing. The sound of tires on gravel announced Sarah's arrival. She entered the barn carrying a cooler and medical bag, her eyes immediately assessing both patient and caretaker. You look worse than she does, Sarah observed, setting down her equipment. Did you sleep at all? Tom shrugged. Enough. Sarah didn't press the issue, turning her attention to Solace. Instead, her examination was thorough, her expression carefully neutral, until she finished. Her temperatures down 0.5 degree, she finally announced. Not a dramatic improvement, but it's moving in the right direction. Lung sounds are still concerning, but the nebulizer seems to be helping. Tom released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. So she might make it. We're not out of the woods yet, Sarah cautioned. But she's fighting. The next 72 hours will tell us a lot. She opened the cooler, revealing neatly labeled medication bottles and feeding supplies. I brought specialized formula for FOS with respiratory issues. It's easier to digest, which means she can put more energy toward healing, as Sarah demonstrated the feeding technique. Tom's phone rang. The screen displayed Matthew's bank, a call he'd been avoiding for weeks. He silenced it without answering. Problems? Sarah asked, noticing the gesture. Nothing new, he replied, turning his attention back to the foe. Just the usual reminders that running a ranch on sentiment instead of sense has its consequences. Sarah's gaze lingered on him for a moment longer than necessary. Tom, I know it's not my place, but if you need help, I don't, he interrupted, his tone brooking. No argument. We're managing fine. The veterinarian nodded, respecting his boundaries despite her obvious concern. I've got rounds this morning, but I'll be back this afternoon. Call me if anything changes. After she left, Tom forced himself to walk back to the house, Star trotting faithfully at his heels. The kitchen, with its faded curtains and outdated appliances, stood as a time capsule to Clara's life. He'd changed. Nothing. Since her passing, her collection of rooster figurines still lined the windowsill. Her handwritten recipes still tucked in the drawer beside the stove. He made coffee and swallowed 2 aspirin for the ache in his back, then checked his neglected answering machine. 3 messages blinked urgently, one from Ray Matthews at the bank, one from Maria at the feed store gently inquiring about his overdue account, and one that made him freeze in place. Dad, it's Elijah. I got your letter. I'll be in Sage River on business next week. Maybe we could talk. Call me back at this number. Tom stared at the machine, a complex surge of emotions washing over him. 3 years of strained phone calls and unanswered letters had created a chasm between him and his son. Their last face-to-face encounter had dissolved into bitter accusations, Elijah blaming him for pushing Clara to work despite her illness, Tom accusing his son of abandoning the ranch and his heritage for city life. The letter Tom had sent a month ago, an awkward attempt at reconciliation prompted by his 60th birthday approaching, had received no response until now. He wasn't prepared for Elijah's sudden appearance. Not with Solace requiring round-the-clock care and the ranch hanging by a financial thread. He reached for the phone, then withdrew. His hand later. He'd call back later when he'd figured out what to say, fortified with coffee and a hastily made sandwich. Tom returned to the barn for Solace's next treatment. To his surprise, he found her attempting to stand, her spindly legs trembling. With the effort, she managed to rise halfway before collapsing back to the straw with a soft whimper. "Whoa there, young lady," Tom said, hurrying to her side. "You're getting ahead of yourself." Despite the failed attempt, Tom felt a surge of hope. Hereford indicated strength he hadn't been sure she possessed as he administered the nebulizer treatment. He spoke to her continuously, a running commentary about the ranch, the weather, the stubborn fence post by the creek that kept working itself loose. No matter how many times he reinforced it, the one-sided conversation felt surprisingly natural, as if the foe understood every word. By afternoon, Solace had managed to drink a small amount of water on her own. Another promising sign. Sarah confirmed his observations. During her second visit, cautious optimism softening the professional detachment in her assessment. "Keep doing exactly what you're doing," she advised. "Something about your presence seems to calm her." The next 3 days established a grueling routine. Tom slept in the barn, catching moments of rest between treatments. He neglected everything but essential chores, letting voicemails pile up and bills remain unopened opened on the kitchen table. His entire world narrowed to the struggle playing out in that stall, a silent battle between life and death, with Solace at its center. On the 4th morning, Tom awoke to an unfamiliar sound, a soft nickering that wasn't coming from his aging quarter-horse Thunder. In the adjacent stall, he opened his eyes to find Solace standing steady on her feet, watching him with those intelligent eyes that had first captured his attention at the auction. "Well, look at you," he said, his voice rough with sleep and emotion. "Decided to join the land of the living, have you?" The foe took a tentative step toward him, then another. Her movements were unsteady but purposeful. When she reached the edge of the stall where he sat, she extended her delicate muzzle, breathing in his scent. Tom remained perfectly still, hard lie. Daring to breathe after a moment, Solace gently nudged his shoulder, the gesture so reminiscent of how Clara's beloved horse used to greet her that Tom felt his throat tighten. "You're something else. You know that," he whispered when Sarah arrived for her morning check. Her professional composure momentarily slipped at the sight of Solace standing. "I didn't expect this for at least another week," she admitted, shaking her head in wonder. "Her will to survive is remarkable." After completing her examination, she added, "Her lungs are still compromised, but the infection is responding to the antibiotics. I think we might be witnessing a genuine recovery." Tom, news of the sick Mustang F's unexpected rally spread quickly through Sage River's tightly woven community. By nightfall, Martha Davis from the diner had delivered a homemade casserole to save Tom from his own cooking, and Henry Williams, an old friend of Tom's father, stopped by with extra hay, just in case. "You're running low with all this excitement," Tom accepted their kindness with gruff thanks, uncomfortable with the attention. but grateful for the tangible support. It had been years since he'd allowed neighbors to step across the invisible boundary. He ed after Clara's death. Their reappearance in his life felt both intrusive and comforting. The following morning brought another unexpected visitor. Tom was mixing Solace's special feed when a sleek black pickup pulled into the driveway. Frank Peterson stepped out, his expensive boots, immediately gathering dust from the unpaved yard. Morgan, he called, approaching the barn with the confident stride of a man accustomed to commanding attention. Heard your rescue project is beating the odds. Tom wiped his hands on his jeans. Instantly wary word. Travels fast, small town, Peterson replied with a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. He peered over the stall door at Solace, who had retreated to the far corner at the stranger's arrival. Interesting coloration she's developing now. That she's cleaning up almost reminds me of those Kyer Mustangs from the Steen Mountain. Her something in Peterson's too. Casual tone raised Tom's hackles. Just a regular Mustang Foal as far as I know. Probably rounded up from public lands and neglected by whoever bought her first. Peterson hummed noncommittally, still studying Solace with unsettling intensity. Tell you what, Morgan, I admire. What you've done here, nursing her back from death's saint, must have cost you a pretty penny in vet bills. Why don't I take her off your hands? $5. So 5 times what she'd be worth even if she makes a full recovery. The offer hung in the air between them. $5,000 would cover Tom's overdue mortgage payment, and by him breathing room with his other creditors, it was a lifeline being extended at exactly the moment he needed it most. Tom glanced at Solace, who watched the exchange with those knowing eyes. In just a few days, she transformed from ADing animal he'd impulsively rescued to a presence that had somehow reopened his long-closed heart to the possibility of attachment. She's not for sale, Tom said, the words emerging with quiet certainty. Peterson's expression hardened. Don't be foolish. Morgan, everyone knows. Sunrise Ranch is hanging by a thread. You can barely afford to feed yourself, let alone support a special needs horse. 10. Sure, 0. My final offer. Tom straightened to his full height, looking Peterson directly in the eye. I appreciate your concern for my financial situation, but my answer stands. Solace isn't going anywhere. Solace. Peterson scoffed. You've named that worthless animal. She's worth more than your money. Tom replied evenly. Good day, Peterson. The wealthy breeder's face flushed with anger, unused to having his offers rejected. You'll regret this. Morgan, that stubborn pride of yours is what driven this wrench to the ground. Your father would be ashamed to see what's become of his legacy. The mention of his father struck a nerve, but Tom maintained his composure. I believe you know the way out after Peterson's departure. Tom leaned against the stall door, his heart racing with anger and an unexpected sense of protectiveness. Peterson's interest in Solace seemed disproportionate. There were dozens of young horses available, able for someone with his resources. Why fixate on a sickly rescue Mustang? Solace approached cautiously. Sensing his agitation, she gently pressed her muzzle against his hand in what felt remarkably like comfort. Don't worry, Tom assured her, stroking her still bony neck. That man isn't taking you anywhere. Later that afternoon, Sarah arrived for her scheduled checkup, bringing unexpected company. Lucy Wilkins, her 12-year-old niece, waited shyly by the truck until Sarah beckoned her forward. Hope you don't mind the extra visitor, Sarah said. Lucy's staying with me while her parents are traveling, and she's been dying to meet the miracle who everyone's talking about. Tom hesitated. He'd grown unaccustomed to children in his solitary existence, but nodded his permission. Lucy approached Solace with the natural affinity of a child who understood animals instinctively. Her movements slow and non-threatening. To Tom's surprise, Solace responded to the girl with immediate curiosity, extending her neck over the stall door to investigate this new small human. She's beautiful, Lucy whispered, carefully offering her palm for the photo sniff. Her eyes look so wise. They do, don't they? Tom agreed, watching the gentle interaction with wonder. It was the first time he'd heard someone else articulate what he'd sensed about Solace from the beginning. As Sarah conducted her examination, Lucy asked thoughtful questions about Solace's care. Her genuine interest drew Tom out of his usual reticence, and he found himself explaining the treatment protocol in detail. Her breathing sounds much clearer, Sarah announced, straightening from her stethoscope. And she's already gained a few pounds, Tom. I think it's time to let her have short periods outside. Sunshine and fresh air will do her good as long as we're careful not to let her overexert the prospect of Solace taking her. First steps into G, the sunlight felt significant. I cleared a small paddock. Behind the barn, Tom said soft ground. No hazards, completely fenced. Perfect, Sarah smiled, then glanced at her watch. We need to get going. I have afternoon appointments. Lucy, say goodbye to Solace. The girl stroked the F's forehead. Can I come back sometime? I could help with her care. I've been studying about horses before. Tom could formulate a response to this unexpected offer. Sarah intervened smoothly. That's up to Mr. Morgan, and Solace needs rest right now. We'll talk about it later after they left. Tom prepared for Solace's first venture outdoors. He fashioned a makeshift halter from soft rope, gentle enough not to irritate her healing skin, but secure enough to provide guidance ready for a new adventure. He asked, carefully securing the halter. Solace accepted the unfamiliar equipment without protest, another sign of her remarkable adjustment to human handling. The early afternoon sun cast a golden glow across the ranch as Tom led Solace through the bar door. The FO hesitated at the threshold, blinking in the sudden brightness for a moment. Tom feared the experience might overwhelm her weakened system, but after a deep breath of fresh air, Solace stepped forward with newfound energy. In the small paddock she moved, with increasing confidence, her steps growing stronger as she explored the space. When she reached a patch of green ground, she lowered her head to nibble tentatively, her first natural feeding behavior since arriving at Sunrise Ranch. Tom leaned against the fence, a sense of quiet satisfaction settling over him. The foe still had a long recovery ahead, but watching her explore her surroundings with growing strength, he allowed himself to believe in the possibility of her complete rehabilitation as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the paddock. Tom noticed a dust cloud approaching on the road leading to the ranch. A blue sedan he didn't recognize turned into his driveway, moving slowly as if the driver was uncertain of the location. When the car parked beside his weathered pickup, Tom straightened, squinting against the late afternoon light. The driver's door opened and a tall figure emerged, familiar, yet changed like a photograph that had faded and been recolored incorrectly. Elijah Morgan stood before him, the 3-year absence transformed into physical reality. His son's city clothes and careful haircut created an immediate visual contrast with Tom's worn ranch attire. For a moment neither man spoke, the weight of unresolved conflict suspended between them. "Dad," Elijah finally said, breaking the silence, "I got your message." Tom nodded, his throat suddenly dry. "Wasn't expecting you so. Soon I had business in the area." Elijah replied, his gaze shifting to Solace, who watched the newcomer with obvious curiosity. "This must be the Martha wasteling me about when I stopped at the diner." The mention of Martha's gossip sparked irritation in Tom. News travels fast around here. Some things never change. A ghost of a smile crossed Elijah's face. "She said you were performing miracles." Tom snorted, "Hardly, just basic care and medication." Elijah approached the fence cautiously, maintaining his distance from both the FO and his father. "She looks better than I expected, given the description." "I heard she's a fighter," Tom said, unexpected pride coloring his voice. Rem reminded me of, he stopped himself, the comparison Clara too personal to share in this fragile moment of reconnection. His son seemed to understand the unspoken words. Mom would have done the same thing. Taken in. A hopeless case, nursed it back to health against all odds. The simple acknowledgement of Clara's nature, something they both understood, created a momentary bridge across the chasm of their estrangement. Tom seized it before it could disappear. "You planning to stay in town long?" To Tom's surprise, Solace responded to the girl with immediate curiosity, extending her neck over the stall door to investigate this new small human. "She's beautiful," Lucy whispered, carefully offering her palm for the FO to sniff. "Her eyes look so wise, don't they?" Tom agreed, watching the gentle interaction with wonder. It was the first time he'd heard someone else articulate what he'd sensed about Solace from the beginning. As Sarah conducted her examination, Lucy asked thoughtful questions about Solace's care, Her genuine interest drew Tom out of his usual reticence, and he found himself explaining the treatment protocol in detail. "Her breathing sounds much clearer," Sarah announced, straightening from her stethoscope. "And she's already gained a few pounds, Tom. I think it's time to let her have short periods outside sunshine, and fresh air will do her good, as long as we're careful not to let her overexert the prospect of Solace taking her first steps into G. The sunlight felt significant. "I cleared a small paddock behind the barn," Tom said. "Soft ground, no hazards, completely fenced, perfect." Sarah smiled, then glanced at her watch. "We need to get going. I have afternoon appointments." "Lucy, say goodbye to Solace." The girl stroked the F's forehead. "Can I come back sometime? I could help with her care. I've been studying about horses." Before Tom could formulate a response to this unexpected offer, Sarah intervened, smoothly. "That's up to Mr. Morgan, and Solace needs rest. Right now, we'll talk about it later." After they left, Tom prepared for Solace's first venture outdoors. He fashioned a makeshift halter from soft rope, gentle enough not to irritate her healing skin, but secure enough to provide guidance. "Ready for a new adventure?" he asked, carefully securing the halter. Solace accepted the unfamiliar equipment without protest, another sign of her remarkable adjustment to human handling. The early afternoon sun cast a golden glow across the ranch as Tom led Solace through the barn door. The foe hesitated at the threshold, blinking in the sudden brightness for a moment. Tom feared the experience might overwhelm her weakened system, but after a deep breath of fresh air, Solace stepped forward with newfound energy. In the small paddock she moved, with increasing confidence, her steps growing stronger as she explored the space. When she reached a patch of green ground, she lowered her head to nibble tentatively, her first natural feeding behavior since arriving at Sunrise Ranch. Tom leaned against the fence, a sense of quiet satisfaction settling over him. The foe still had a long recovery ahead, but watching her explore her surroundings with growing strength, he allowed himself to believe in the possibility of her complete rehabilitation. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the paddock, Tom noticed a dust cloud approaching on the road leading to the ranch. A blue sedan he didn't recognize turned into his driveway, moving slowly, as if the driver was uncertain of the location. When the car parked beside his weathered pickup, Tom straightened, squinting against the late afternoon light. The driver's door opened and a tall figure emerged, familiar yet changed, like a photograph that had faded and been recolored incorrectly. Elijah Morgan stood before him, the 3-year absence transformed into physical reality. His son's city clothes and careful haircut created an immediate, visual contrast with Tom's worn ranch attire. For a moment, neither man spoke, the weight of unresolved conflict suspended between them. "Dad," Elijah finally said, breaking the silence. "I got your message." Tom nodded, his throat suddenly dry. "Wasn't expecting you so soon. I had business in the area." Elijah replied, his gaze shifting to Solace, who watched the newcomer with obvious curiosity. "This must be the Martha wasteling me about when I stopped at the diner." The mention of Martha's gossip sparked irritation in Tom. "News travels fast around here. Some things never change." A ghost of a smile crossed Elijah's face. "She said you were performing miracles." Tom snorted. "Hardly, just basic care and medication." Elijah approached the fence cautiously, maintaining his distance from both the FO and his father. "She looks better than I expected, given the description. I heard she's a fighter," Tom said, unexpected pride coloring his voice. Ram reminded me of. He stopped himself, the comparison to Clara too personal to share in this fragile moment of reconnection. His son seemed tounder. Stand the unspoken words. "Mom would have done the same thing, taken in a hopeless case, nursed it back to health against all odds." The simple acknowledgement of Clara's nature, something they both understood, created a momentary bridge across the chasm of their estrangement. Tom seized it before it could disappear. "You planning to stay in town long?" To Tom's surprise, Solace responded to the girl with immediate curiosity, extending her neck over the stall door to investigate this new small human. "She's beautiful," Lucy whispered, carefully offering her palm for the foe to sniff. "Her eyes look so wise." "They do, don't they?" Tom agreed, watching the gentle interaction with wonder. It was the first time he'd heard someone else articulate what he'd sensed about Solace from the beginning. As Sarah conducted her examination, Lucy asked thoughtful questions about Solace's care. Her genuine interest drew Tom out of his usual reticence, and he found himself explaining the treatment protocol in detail. Her breathing sounds much clearer, Sarah announced, straightening from her stethoscope. And she's already gained a few pounds, Tom. I think it's time to let her have short periods outside sunshine. And fresh air will do her good, as long as we're careful not to let her overexert the prospect of Solace taking her first steps into G. The sunlight felt significant. I cleared a small paddock behind the barn, Tom said, soft ground, no hazards, completely fenced, perfect. Sarah smiled, then glanced at her watch. We need to get going. I have afternoon appointments. Lucy, say goodbye to Solace. The girl stroked the F's forehead. Can I come back sometime? I could help with her care. I've been studying about horses before. Tom could formulate a response to this unexpected offer. Sarah intervened smoothly. That's up to Mr. Morgan, and Solace needs rest. Right now, we'll talk about it later after they left. Tom prepared for Solace's first venture outdoors. He fashioned a makeshift halter from soft rope, gentle enough not to irritate her healing skin, but secure enough to provide guidance. Ready for a new adventure? He asked, carefully securing the halter. Solace accepted the unfamiliar equipment without protest. Another sign of her remarkable adjustment to human handling. The early afternoon sun cast a golden glow across the ranch as Tom led Solace. Through the barn door, the foe hesitated at the threshold. Blinking in the sudden brightness for a moment, Tom feared the experience might overwhelm her weakened system. But after a deep breath of fresh air, Solace stepped forward with newfound energy. In the small paddock, she moved with increasing confidence, her steps growing stronger as she explored the space. When she reached a patch of green ground, she lowered her head to nibble tentatively, her first natural feeding behavior since arriving at Sunrise Ranch. Tom leaned against the fence, a sense of quiet satisfaction settling over him. The foe still had a long recovery ahead, but watching her explore her surroundings with growing strength, he allowed himself to believe in the possibility of her complete rehabilitation as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the paddock. Tom noticed a dust cloud approaching on the road leading to the ranch. A blue sedan he didn't recognize turned into his driveway, moving slowly as if the driver was uncertain of the location when the car parked. Beside his weathered pickup, Tom straightened, squinting against the late afternoon light. The driver's door opened, and a tall figure emerged, familiar yet changed, like a photograph that had faded and been recolored incorrectly. Elijah Morgan stood before him, the 3-year absence transformed into physical reality. His son's city clothes and careful haircut created an immediate visual contrast with Tom's worn ranch attire. For a moment, neither man spoke, the weight of unresolved conflict suspended between them. Dad, Elijah finally said, breaking the silence. I got your message. Tom nodded, his throat suddenly dry. Wasn't expecting you so soon. I had business in the area. Elijah replied, his gaze shifting to Solace, who watched the newcomer with obvious curiosity. This must be the foe Martha was telling me about when I stopped at the diner. The mention of Martha's gossip sparked irritation in Tom. News travels fast around here. Some things never change. A ghost of a smile crossed Elijah's face. She said, you were performing miracles. Tom snorted, hardly just basic care and medication. Elijah approached the fence cautiously, maintaining his distance from both the FO and his father. She looks better than I expected given the description I heard. She's a fighter, Tom said, unexpected pride coloring his voice. Riem reminded me of. He stopped himself. The comparison to Clara, too personal to share in this fragile moment of reconnection. His son seemed to understand the unspoken words Mom would have done. The same thing, you know, taken in a hopeless case, nursed it back to health against all odds. The simple acknowledgement of Clara's nature, something they both understood, created a momentary bridge across the chasm of their estrangement. Tom seized it. Before it could disappear, you planning to stay in town long? To Tom's surprise, Solace responded to the girl with immediate curiosity, extending her neck over the stall door to investigate this new small human. She's beautiful, Lucy whispered, carefully, offering her palm for the foe to sniff. Her eyes look so wise, they do, don't they? Tom agreed, watching the gentle interaction with wonder. It was the first time he'd heard someone else articulate what he'd sensed about Solace from the beginning as Sarah Conducted here examination. Lucy asked thoughtful questions about Solace's care. Her genuine interest drew Tom out of his usual reticence, and he found himself explaining the treatment protocol in detail. Her breathing sounds much clearer, Sarah announced, straightening from her stethoscope, and she's already gained a few pounds, Tom. I think it's time to let her have short periods outside sunshine. And fresh air will do her good, as long as we're careful not to let her overexert the prospect of Solace. Taking her first steps into G, the sunlight felt significant. I cleared a small paddock behind the barn. Tom said soft ground. No hazards, completely fenced. Perfect. Sarah smiled, then glanced at her watch. We need to get going. I have afternoon appointments. Lucy said goodbye to Solace. The girl stroked the F's forehead. Can I come back sometime? I could help with her care. I've been studying about horses before. Tom could formulate a response to this unexpected offer. Sarah intervened. Smoothly. That's up to Mr. Morgan, and Solace needs rest right now. We'll talk about it later. After they left, Tom prepared for Solace's first venture outdoors. He fashioned a makeshift halter from soft rope. Gentle enough not to irritate her healing skin, but secure enough to provide guidance. Ready for a new adventure? He asked, carefully securing the halter. Solace accepted the unfamiliar equipment without protest, another sign of her remarkable adjustment to human handling. The early afternoon sun cast a golden glow across the ranch as Tom led Solace through the barn door. The foe hesitated at the threshold, blinking in the sudden brightness for a moment. Tom feared the experience might overwhelm her weakened system, but after a deep breath of fresh air, Solace stepped forward with newfound energy in the small paddock. She moved with increasing confidence, her steps growing stronger as she explored the space. When she reached a patch of green grass, she lowered her head to nibble, tentatively, her first natural feeding behavior since arriving at sunrise. Ranch Tom leaned against the fence, a sense of quiet satisfaction settling over him. The foe still had a long recovery ahead, but watching her explore her surroundings with growing strength, he allowed himself to believe in the possibility of her complete rehabilitation as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the paddock. Tom noticed a dust cloud approaching on the road leading to the ranch. A blue sedan he didn't recognize turned into his driveway, moving slowly, as if the driver was uncertain of the location. When the car parked beside his weathered pickup, Tom straightened, squinting against the late afternoon light. The driver's door opened and a tall figure emerged, familiar yet changed, like a photograph that had faded and been recolored incorrectly. Elijah Morgan stood before him, the 3-year absence transformed into physical reality. His son's city clothes and careful haircut created an immediate visual contrast with Tom's worn ranch attire. For a moment neither man spoke, the weight of unresolved conflict suspended between them. Dad, Elijah finally said, breaking the silence, I got your message. Tom nodded, his throat suddenly dry. Wasn't expecting you so soon. I had business in the area. Elijah replied, his gaze shifting to Solace, who watched the newcomer with obvious curiosity. This must be the foe Martha was telling me about when I stopped at the diner. The mention of Martha's gossip sparked irritation in Tom. News travels faster around here. Some things never change. A ghost of a smile crossed Elijah's face. She said you were performing miracles. Tom snorted hardly. Just basic care and medication. Elijah approached the fence cautiously, maintaining his distance from both the FO and his father. She looks better than I expected, given the description. I heard she's a fighter. Tom said, unexpected pride coloring his voice. Reminded me of. He stopped himself. The comparison to Clara, too personal to share in this fragile moment of reconnection. His son seemed to understand the unspoken words. Mom would have done the same thing, taken in a hopeless case, neureted back to health against all odds. The simple acknowledgement of Clara's nature, something they both understood, created a momentary bridge across the chasm of their estrangement. Tom seized it before it could disappear. You planning to stay in town long? Elijah hesitated. A few days, maybe a week. I'm staying at the River Inn. Tom nodded, searching for words to extend the conversation before he could formulate a response. Solace approached, the fence separating them, her curiosity apparently overcoming her caution. She stretched her neck toward Elijah, nostrils flaring as she took in his scent. "She's friendly," Elijah observed carefully, extending his hand with people who deserve it. Tom replied, the words carrying less edge than they might have 3 years ago. As Solace gently investigated Elijah's outstretched fingers, a tentative connection formed between father and son, not in words or reconciliation, but in shared appreciation for the resilient creature before them. It wasn't forgiveness or resolution, but it was a beginning fragile as a foal's first steps, but real. Nonetheless, morning dew glistened on the paddock fence as Tom distributed fresh hay to the stalls. A week had passed since Elijah's unexpected arrival, and an uneasy truce had formed between father and son. They navigated around each other with careful politeness, their conversation limited to safe topics. The weather, local news, Solace's improving condition, the deeper wounds, remained untouched like bruises they both pretended not to see. Solace's recovery had accelerated with each passing day. Her coat, once dull and patchy, now gleamed with health, revealing distinctive markings along her flanks that had been obscured by neglect. Her strength had returned enough that Sarah had cleared her for longer periods outside. Though Tom still monitored her closely for any signs of respiratory distress, as if sensing his thoughts, the foe appeared at the paddock gate, nickering softly for his attention. Tom found himself smiling, a gesture that had become surprisingly frequent since Solace's arrival. "Morning to you too," he called, finishing his chores before approaching her. She greeted him with a gentle nudge to his shoulder, a ritual that had developed between them. "Ready for breakfast?" "I suppose." The sound of the back door opening drew his attention. Elijah emerged from the house awkwardly, balancing 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "Thought you might want this," his son said, offering one of the mugs as he joined Tom at the fence. Tom accepted with a nod of thanks, the small gesture of consideration creating a momentary warmth between them. They stood in companionable silence, watching Sol explore her paddock with increasing confidence. "She's nothing like the dying animal you described finding at the auction," Elijah finally said. "Sarah thinks it's remarkable how quickly she's bounced back. She's special." Tom agreed, allowing the pride in his voice to show. "Got something in her that doesn't know how to quit." Elijah hesitated, then asked, "Have you thought about what happens next once she's fully covered?" The question caught Tom off guard in the intensity of Solace's medical crisis. He hadn't considered the longer-term implications of adding another horse to his struggling operation. "She stays here," he said firmly. "This is her home now, Dad." "I've been looking at the accounts," Elijah said carefully. "The ranch is in worse shape than I realized. The property taxes alone." "I didn't ask you to look at the accounts." Tom interrupted, his momentary openness closing like a gate, slammed shut. "Someone needed to." Elijah persisted, a familiar stubbornness inherited directly from his father, evident in his tone. "The bank is threatening foreclosure. You've been ignoring registered letters for months." Tom turned to face his son directly. "This ranch has weathered hard times before. We'll manage." "Not this time," Elijah said, his voice gentler than his words. "Not without changes. The cattle operation barely breaks, even the equipment needs updating, and now you've taken on her horse that will need specialized care for months, maybe years." The truth in Hisson's assessment stung like salt in an open wound. Tom had been avoiding the reality of his financial situation for too long, making decisions based on emotion rather than practicality. Exactly what he'd accused Elijah of doing when he left for college, instead of staying to work the ranch. Before Tom could formulate a response, Sarah's truck appeared on the driveway, dust billowing behind her tie rays. She wasn't due for a checkup until the afternoon, and the unusual timing of her visit sent a ripple of concern through Tom. "Something's wrong," he muttered, setting down his coffee mug and moving toward the approaching vehicle. Sarah emerged from her truck with uncharacteristic haste, a folder clutched in her hand. "Tom, Elijah," she greeted them, her eyes bright with barely contained excitement. "I need to show you something." She led them to the paddock where Solace greeted her with familiar friendliness. "When I was reviewing Solace's blood work last night, I noticed some unusual markers. I sent samples to a colleague at the State University for confirmation." She opened the folder, revealing photographs and technical documents. "Look at these markings developing on her coat, particularly along her barrel and the dorsal stripe. Tom studied the distinctive patterns that had emerged as Solace's health. Improved uncoloration with primitive markings that seemed to darken daily. They're consistent with Spanish Mustang heritage, Sarah explained, but with specific genetic markers that are incredibly rare. My colleague believes Solace might be descended from the ghost herd bloodline. The name sparked recognition in Tom's memory stories. His grandfather had told about a legendary band of Mustangs that had roamed the high desert plateaus, descendants of the original Spanish horses, brought by conquistador. Centuries ago, they were said to possess remarkable endurance, intelligence, and an affinity for cattle work that made them prized among ranchers who could catch and train them. The ghost herd was thought to have died out 30 years ago when the last stretches of their territory were developed. Sarah continued, if Solace carries their bloodline, she's not just a random Mustang. She's a living link to a heritage everyone thought was lost. Elijah, who had been examining the photos with growing interest, looked up sharply. Is that why Peterson was so eager to buy her? Could he have recognized these markers? It's possible. Sarah conceded. Frank Peterson has been trying to breed the perfect ranch horse for decades. A direct descendant of the ghost herd would be invaluable to his program. The implication settled over Tom like a physical weight. What he had viewed as a simple act of compassion, rescuing a dying foe, had unknowingly preserved something infinitely more significant. It also explained Peterson's unusual interest and persistent offers. This changes nothing about her care, Tom said firmly. But it does mean we need to be more careful about who knows what we've discovered. Sarah nodded in agreement. I've asked my colleague to keep this confidential for now, but Tom, once Solace matures, you'll need to make decisions about breeding. Her genetics are too valuable to lose. The conversation was interrupted by the rail off another vehicle. Becky Taylor's battered farm truck bouncing up the driveway. Becky, a neighboring rancher known for her skill with difficult horses, waved as she parked beside Sarah's vehicle. Sorry to drop in, Yoon announced. She called as she approached, her practical ponytail and well-worn boots marking her as a working ranchera there. Then a casual visitor, Maria at the feed store, mentioned you'd rescued a Mustang. Thought I might offer some help with gentling her. Once stronger, Tom had known Becky for years. They'd even dated briefly in high school before life took them in different directions after her husband's death. 5 years earlier, she'd taken over their modest horse training operation, single-handedly earning respect throughout the region for her natural approach to working with traumatized animals. She's recovering well. Tom replied, making introductions, but I'd appreciate your expertise when the time comes. Beck approached the paddock fence cautiously, observing Solace with a professional eye. The FO, usually weary with strangers, moved toward her with unexpected interest. Well, hello there, beautiful, Becky said softly, extending her hand. Palm down. Solace sniffed it carefully, then pressed her muzzle against it in greeting. She's remarkably trusting for a Mustang, especially one that's been through trauma. Yusuf seems to know who she can trust. Tom observed, watching the interaction with interest. Becky studied the FO more closely, her expression shifting to one of surprised recognition. Tom, these markings, they're reminiscent of the old ghost herd lineage. My grandfather used to have a stallion with similar characteristics. She glanced at Sarah. You've noticed it too, haven't you? Sarah nodded, sharing a look with Tom that silently asked how much to reveal. Tom made a quick decision, instinctively trusting Becky's discretion. We just confirmed it through genetic testing, he explained. Sarah thinks she might be a direct descendant. Becky's eyes widened. That would explain Peterson's sudden interest in your affairs, Martha mentioned. He'd been asking questions about your rescue project at the dinery. Yesterday, the news sent a chill through Tom. Peterson's persistence was taking on a more concerning dimension. He offered to buy her. Tom acknowledged twice now, with increasing amounts. Be careful, Tom, Becky warned. Frank Peterson doesn't take rejection. Well, especially when it comes to something he wants for his breeding program. He's been trying to recreate the ghost herd characteristics for years without success, as if summoned by their conversation. The distinct sound of Peterson's black pickup growled in the distance. Tom exchanged glances with Elijah, an unspoken agreement passing between them. Take Solace to the back barn, Tom instructed his son, surprising himself with how naturally he'd fallen into trusting Elijah with the FO safety. Becky, would you mind going with him? Your expertise might be useful if she gets nervous with the move." Elijah nodded, understanding the strategy without explanation. He and Becky led Solace away from the main paddock, disappearing around the back of the barn just as Peterson's vehicle pulled into the yard. This time, Peterson wasn't alone. A younger man. Tom recognized Jake, Peterson Frank's son and business partner, accompanied him, along with a third man in a suit who carried a leather portfolio. Morgan Peterson called his forked joviality, failing to mask the determination in his stance. "Beautiful morning for a visit. 3 visits in 2 weeks." Tom replied evenly. "People will start to talk." Peterson's smile tightened. "I've brought my attorney Richard Wilson. I'd like to make you a formal offer for that Mustang Foal." Tom crossed his arms, his weathered face revealing nothing, as I've told you twice now. "She's not for sale," the attorney stepped forward. "Mr. Morgan, my client is prepared to offer $50,000 for the animal in question. That's approximately 50 times her market value, even accounting for potential training and development." The amount momentarily stole Tom's breath. $50,000 would clear his debts entirely, with enough left over to repair the essential equipment and perhaps even hire seasonal help. It was a lifeline that could save Sunrise Ranch. "That's very generous," Tom acknowledged, choosing his words carefully. "But I'm afraid my answer remains the same name." Peterson's facade of friendliness evaporated. "This is absurd, Morgan. You're a businessman, or at least you used to be, no? Sentimentality is worth turning down that kind of money, especially in your situation." The pause clearly referenced Tom's financial difficulties, knowledge that shouldn't have been readily available to Peterson. "My situation is my concern," Tom replied, an anger simmering beneath his composed exterior. "And my answer is final. Jake." Peterson stepped forward, his expression calculating in a way that reminded Tom uncomfortably of a younger version of Frank. "We know what she is. Morgan, the genetic markers are obvious to anyone who knows what to look for. You're sitting on a gold mine, but you lack the resources to properly develop her potential." The confirmation that they had identified Solace's heritage independently heightened Tom's weariness. This wasn't just about acquiring a promising horse. It was about controlling a bloodline, thought extinct one, that could establish their breeding program as truly exceptional. "All the more reason to ensure she stays where she'll be valued for more than her genetics," Tom replied steadily. The attorney cleared his throat. "Mr. Morgan, my client has also instructed me to inform you that his offer comes with certain considerations. Should you decline, Mr. Peterson is prepared to file a complaint with the County Animal Welfare Board regarding improper medical care for a critically ill animal without proper veterinary documentation. Such an investigation could result in the animal being remanded to state custody." The thinly veiled threat hung in the air. Tom felt Sarah step closer to him in silent support. "Actually," she interjected, her professional voice carrying unexpected authority as Solace's veterinarian of record, "I've maintained comprehensive documentation of her care since Mr. Morgan acquired her. All treatments have exceeded standard protocols for an animal. In her condition," she met Peterson's gaze directly, "I'd be happy to present these records to any investigating authority." Peterson's expression darkened at this unexpected obstacle. "This isn't over, Morgan. That foe belongs in a professional breeding program where her genetics can be properly utilized, not wasted on a failing ranch run by a stubborn old man who can't accept when it's time to let go." The barb struck closer to home than Tom wanted to admit, echoing doubts that haunted his sleepless nights. Was he being selfish, keeping Solace when her value could secure his financial future? Was his attachment to the foe really about her welfare, or his own need for purpose after Clara's death? Before he could respond, another voice joined the confrontation. "I believe you've made your offer and received your answer," Elijah stated, appearing from behind the barn as a representative of the Morgan family interests. "I can assure you that any further attempts at coercion will be met with appropriate legal response." The sudden appearance of Tom's son, dressed in his city clothes but speaking with unmistakable ranch authority, momentarily threw Peterson off balance. "This conversation isn't finished," Peterson warned as he retreated to his vehicle. "Think carefully about your next move. Morgan's stubbornness is an expensive quality these days." After the Petersons departed, a heavy silence fell over the yard. Tom found himself unable to meet Elijah's gaze. The unexpected alliance in the face of Peterson's threats creating an emotional complexity he wasn't prepared to address. "Thank you for the documentation," he said to Sarah instead. "I hadn't considered. They might try that angle." Sarah's expression was troubled. "Peterson has connections on the county board. We should prepare for the possibility of an inspection just in case, and I should contact my firm's legal department." Elijah added, "Empty threats are one thing, but we should be ready if they try something more substantial." The casual "we didn't escape." Tom's noticed a subtle indication that, despite their estrangement, Elijah considered himself aligned with his father in this conflict. The realization created a complicated warmth in Tom's chest. Beck emerged from behind the barn leading Solace on a makeshift lead rope. "All clear?" she asked, reading the tension in the air for now. Tom confirmed, his attention immediately drawn to the fode-spite. The confrontation that had just occurred, seeing Solace's improving condition, centered him, reinforcing his conviction that he'd made the right decision. "I need to get back to my rounds," Sarah said, gathering her maternal IAL. "But I'll expedite the formal care documentation and make copies for your records." After Sarah departed, Becky approached Tom with a thoughtful expression. "This situation with Peterson is going to escalate," she said quietly. "He's not used to being denied something he wants, especially by someone he considers beneath him." "I can handle Peterson," Tom replied, though the confidence in his voice didn't quite reach his eyes. "I don't doubt it," Becky acknowledged with a small smile. "But you don't have to handle him alone." She glanced meaningfully at Elijah, who was checking Solace's water trough sometimes. "The things we think we've lost have a way of finding their way back when we need them most." The insight struck Tom with unexpected force. The parallels between Solace's journey and his relationship with his son suddenly clear. Both had seemed retria lost, yet circumstances had conspired to bring each back into his life at precisely the moment he needed them. "I should get going," Becky continued, sensing Tom's need for space. "But I'll stop by tomorrow, if that's all right." Solace should start some basic handling exercises now that she's regaining her strength after Becky left. Elijah approached his father, the awkwardness between them temporarily displaced by their shared concern for Solace. $50. Sorcerer is a lot to turn down, Elijah said carefully, especially with the ranch's financial situation. Tom studied his son's face, looking for judgment but finding only pragmatic assessment. "Some things aren't measured in dollars," he replied. "Your mother taught me that, though it took me too long to really understand it." The mention of Clara created a momentary bridge between them, shared grief that had driven them apart, but might now serve as common ground for reconciliation. "I need to drive into town," Elijah said after a moment. "Pick up a few things, make some calls about Peterson's legal threats. Will you be all right here alone?" Tom nodded, touched by the concern underlying the question. "Been managing alone for 3 years. One more afternoon won't kill me, eh?" Shadow crossed Elijah's face at the reminder of their long separation, but he didn't rise to the implicit accusation. "I'll be back before dark. Call if anything happens with Solace." After Elijah departed, Tom returned to the barn, finding comfort in the familiar routine of mucking stalls and refilling water troughs. Solace followed him from the paddock, her natural curiosity drawing her to investigate each task. Her respiratory issues had improved enough that she no longer wheezed with exertion, though Sarah had cautioned against any strenuous activity. As Tom worked the mornings, confrontation replayed in his mind. Peterson's determination to acquire Solace troubled him, not just for the immediate threat it posed, but for what it revealed about how others valued the foe to Peterson. She was merely a genetic resource to be exploited, her individual qualities reduced to breeding potential. Yet even as Tom rejected this utilitarian view, he recognized uncomfortable truths in Peterson's assessment. Sunrise Ranch was struggling financially, and his limited resources might indeed hinder Solace's development. Was his attachment to her truly in her best interest, or merely satisfying his own need for purpose? A soft nickering interrupted his troubled thoughts. Solace had approached silently, her muzzle gently nudging his shoulder in the gesture that had become their private form of communication. Tom found himself smiling despite his concerns, reaching up to stroke her increasingly sleek neck. "What am I going to do with you?" he murmured, causing all this commotion when you were supposed to be a simple good deed? Solace's intelligent eyes seemed to study him as if, truly comprehending his words, she shook her head. Her growing man rippling with the movement, then deliberately turned toward the main paddock where Thunder Tom's aging quarter horse grazed peacefully. Tom followed her gaze, a new consideration forming in his mind. Since Solace's arrival, he had been so focused on her medical needs that he hadn't considered her social requirements as a herd animal. Horses weren't meant to live in isolation. They needed companionship examples to learn from hierarchies to understand you want to meet Thunder properly. Is that it? Tom asked, reading her body language. Well, I suppose it's time for introductions. He's a gentleman, should be a good first friend for you. Hellied Solace toward the larger paddock, monitoring her reaction carefully. Thunder raised his head at their approach, ears forward with mild interest, at 24. The gelding had seen generations of animals come and go on Sunrise Ranch, his calm temperament making him an ideal companion for newcomers. Tom opened the connecting gate, allowing Solace to enter at her own pace. She hesitated at the threshold, her instincts clearly both curious about and wary of the larger horse. Thunder remained where he was, neither threatening nor retreating, since simply waiting with equine patience after several minutes of contemplation. Solace ventured forward, her movement gaining confidence with each step. When she reached Thunder, the old gelding lowered his head in greeting, their muzzles touching briefly in a moment of acceptance that brought unexpected moisture to Tom's eyes. The simple interaction, one horse welcoming another into shared space, struck him as profoundly moving. It represented everything that had been missing from his own life since Clara's death connection. Acceptance, the willingness to make room for another being, despite the complications it might bring. As he watched Solace explore here, expanded territory under Thunder's watchful eye, Tom became aware of another vehicle approaching. He tensed, automatically fearing Peterson's return. But the battered truck that appeared belonged to Henry Williams, his father's oldest friend, and one of the few people Tom had maintained contact with after Clara's death at 75. Henry moved more slowly than in his ranching prime, but his mind remained sharp, and his knowledge of local history unmatched. He approached the fence where Tom stood, leaning on his worn walking stick. "Heard you've been having visits from Frank Peterson," the old man remarked without preamble, "and that the reason might be trotting around your paddock there." Tom sighed. Martha's diner, Grapevine, had been working overtime. "News travels fast. It's a small town," Henry observed, studying Solace with keen interest. "And a Mustang with ghost herd markings is big news to those who know what they're looking at. You recognize it too?" Tom asked, not entirely surprised. Henry had been riding these Rangers since before Tom was born. The old man nodded. "My father worked the Mustang roundup back in the 40s, used to talk about a particular band that ran in the high country, smarter than any domestic horse, with stamina that could outlast the best quarter horse's distinctive markings, just like your little filly there." He pointed to Solace's developing dorsal stripe and leg barring. "Those patterns are Spanish colonial markers of the original bloodlines brought over 400 years ago." "Sarah confirmed it through genetic testing," Tom acknowledged. "Seeing no point in secrecy with Henry, says Solace might be one of the last direct descendants." Henry whistled low. "No wonder Peterson circling. He's been trying to create a breeding program that captures those traits for decades, spent a fortune importing Spanish horses, crossing them with local stock, all trying to recreate what nature perfected centuries ago." The old man's expression darkened. "Never understood that folks like Peterson only value what they can own, and control the ghost herd was special, precisely because it remained willed, adapting to this specific territory in ways no managed breeding program could replicate." Tom found himself nodding in agreement, Henry's words articulating what he'd felt instinctively about Solace from the beginning. Her value lay not just in her genetics, but in the spirit that had allowed her to survive against impossible odds, a quality that couldn't be recorded in stud books or replicated in controlled breeding facilities. "Peterson offered $50 sorcerer for her today." Tom admitted, "Threatened legal action when I refused." Henry's weathered face showed no surprise. That man's used to buying whatever he wants must be driving him crazy to encounter something money can't purchase. He studied Tom with knowing eyes. "Though that amount would solve a lot of problems for Sunrise Ranch." "It would," Tom acknowledged, "but it wouldn't be right." The simple declaration hung in the air between them, neither man feeling the need to elaborate. They stood in companionable silence watching as Solace tentatively explored her new environment, Thunder maintaining a protective distance that offered security without crowding. "She's got good instincts," Henry observed. "See how she's reading Thunder's body language, respecting his space but staying close enough for safety." Tom nodded, recognizing the natural wisdom in the foal's behavior. Despite her limited experience with other horses, she demonstrated an intuitive understanding of her dynamics that spoke to her heritage. "Know what you need to do?" Henry asked, his tone suggesting he wasn't really asking. "You need to get that filly around cattle." The ghost herd was famous for their cow sense. Some said they could read a steer's mind before it even knew which way it wanted to run. He tapped his walking stick thoughtfully against the fence post. "If she's got even half those instincts, she might be more valuable to you as a working horse than as a broodmare for Peterson's program." The suggestion opened a new perspective. For Tom, he'd been so focused on Solace's recovery and Peterson's threats that he hadn't considered her potential beyond survival. If she truly carried the legendary traits of her ancestors, she might eventually contribute to the ranch's operation in ways that transcended sentimental value. "She's still too young and fragile for real work," Tom said, thinking aloud, "but simple exposure to the herd might tell us something about her instincts." "Exactly." Henry agreed. "Just watching how share spawns could be illuminating, and if Peterson comes sniffing around again, it wouldn't hurt to have more evidence of her value." Beyond breeding potential, as Henry departed, leaving Tom with much to consider, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Sunrise. Ranch Solace had settled comfortably in Thunder's vicinity, the two horses grazing peacefully together, as if they'd been companions for years rather than hours. Tom leaned against the fence, the weight of the day's events settling over him. Peterson's threats, Elijah's unexpected support, their revelation of Solace's rare heritage, all created a complex tapestry of challenges and possibilities. For the first time in years, he found himself looking toward the future with something other than resignation, envisioning a path forward that included both his son and their remarkable foe, that had unexpectedly transformed his solitary existence. As if sensing his thoughts, Solace raised her head, her gaze finding him across the paddock. The intelligence in those eyes, the same quality that had prompted him to bid at the auction, seemed to convey understanding. "Beyond our youth and species, we'll figure this out together," Tom promised quietly, the words carried away by the gentle evening breeze, all of it the following. Morning arrived with a clarity that seemed to scrub the Montana sky clean, revealing mountains that had been shrouded in haze for days. Tom rose before dawn, his aging bones protesting the early hour, but his mind too active for further rest. The events of the previous day had shifted, something fundamental in his world, drawing battle lines while simultaneously rebuilding bridges he thought permanently burned. He found Elijah already in the kitchen, poring over financial documents spread across the worn oak table that had served generations of Morgans. His son looked up as Tom, fatigue evident in the shadows beneath his eyes. "Be at it long?" Tom asked, moving to start the coffee maker most of the night. Elijah admitted, organizing papers into neat stacks. "The ranch's situation is worse than I thought. Even without Peterson threats, the bank is moving toward foreclosure. They've accelerated